Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Jester Section Hiker Podcast, your premier podcast with the spotlight on section hikers. And we definitely hit the spotlight this evening because I am going to get right to it, you guys. We have author, historian, 600 miles plus section hiked on the Appalachian Trail. And I actually think I'm going to call my guest tonight a lifetime AT section hiker. And yeah, you guys, we are going to be talking about this book right here, Virginia's Lost Appalachian Trail. And I mean, you guys, it's 300 miles of trail that were original Appalachian Trail until 1952. And imagine moving 300 miles of trail. And Mills and I were just talking before we started the live episode. That would be like wiping away Connecticut and Massachusetts, like all together, or Georgia through North Carolina. And Virginia, as it stands right now, has 500 miles of trail on the Appalachian Trail. So imagine 300 miles of that trail moved. And that means the communities in the town within that 300 miles were really affected. And Mills is here to tell us all about that this evening. And I want to thank everybody who is in the chat. You could not hear Mills and I talking, but he does recognize a couple of you, RVA Hiker Girl and Carissa. Mills says hello. The chat is hopping tonight. If you guys have questions as we go, please feel free to put them in the chat. And I'm not going to waste any more time because, as you guys know, I can make an hour go by real quick. So, you guys, here he is, my friend, fellow section hiker on the Appalachian Trail, and he is representing his podcast, the Green Tunnel Podcast. There he is. Mills, welcome back.
Julie, thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be back. And I'm really excited to be doing this live. This
I know.
is like a whole new experience.
It's crazy. I can't even believe I decided to go live. It's definitely an interesting experience. So before we dive into your book, The Appalachians, or Virginia's Lost Appalachian Trail, how have you been?
I've been doing good, I mean, I finally got COVID after avoiding it for a very long time.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Yeah, I was really proud of myself, though. As far as I knew, I hadn't had it. And then finally in March, I got it. But other than that, yeah, I've been great. I've been doing a lot of hiking, a lot of talking about the book, going to a lot of communities up and down the trail. And it's really fun to chat with people about it. And, we just wrapped up season 2 of the Green Tunnel. The last episode came out last week, I guess. And so we're taking a little month-long break here. And then I got to start interviewing people for season 3.
Awesome. And so you've been traveling, and I know you went to Trail Days. So talk about your experience at Trail Days.
It's just so much fun. I mean, you've been, it's just so much fun. So much. It's like this incredible amount of positive energy, all concentrated in that tiny little town for a couple of days. And, and everybody has one thing in common, and that is that they all love the Appalachian Trail and they all love hiking. And it was just so much fun. I mean, we talked to, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of people. And I think we handed out like 500 stickers for the podcast.
Well, that's awesome.
I was just walking around in the crowd saying, you need a sticker, So it was a lot of fun.
I did not make it this year, sadly, but that is not going to happen next year. I'm saying it here with you. And I know I was supposed to meet up with RVA Hiker Girl and Carissa, and I just didn't make it, but not next year. And I still haven't marched in the parade with my class, 2017. So I got to do that too. So there are some things to do. And I was thinking about how I was going to get us started talking about your book, And I listened to a couple podcast episodes that were very informative on the Green Tunnel podcast about your book. And then going through the book, one of the things that comes across to me is community and the individuals that were affected by the trail being moved, and what they remember and the stories that came out of these towns. And it actually makes me sad because I'm like, oh man, there's so much stuff that I missed. And an additional 300 miles of Virginia that I would love to go through. So I guess what I would like to do is, the title of your book is Virginia's Lost Appalachian Trail. And I would like you to take us through a journey of creating this book, what prompted this, and then I want you to take us through a journey along the old AT that Earl Schaefer hiked. What was the second gentleman that through hiked? Gene Espy hiked.
Yeah.
And, kind of take us through those 300 miles, but start off with what brought you to even doing this book?
I tell people that as my students in particular, because I teach at George Mason University, and I tell my students that archives are really dangerous places if you're a historian, because you're in the archive and you're working on something, you're going through some documents or some old photos or whatever it might be, and all of a sudden this rabbit hole just opens up in front of you, and like Alice in Wonderland, and you, as a historian, it's your obligation to go and look down into that rabbit hole and see if there's anything interesting down there. And 95% of the time we just back away, like, that's not interesting. I got to focus on what I'm here to do. So what happened to me was I was in the archives of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and I was reading this document, this letter, and it mentioned the route of the Appalachian Trail between Floyd and Franklin counties in Virginia. And okay, I'm originally from Franklin County, which is pretty much due south of Roanoke, and I moved away when I was in elementary school, but that's where my father taught at Ferrum College there, and so that's why we lived there. And I knew the trail didn't come anywhere near Franklin County, which I wouldn't have known if I hadn't actually been from there, I guess. But and so that made me stop, and that was like the rabbit hole opening up, this seeing Franklin County in this letter. And I thought, the Appalachian Trail doesn't go through Franklin County. That's ridiculous. What is this? And so I had to stop and start looking at these documents. And so first there was this letter, and then attached to the letter was an 11-page report describing by a trail scout, describing where the trail ought to go south of Roanoke, including along the border between Floyd and Franklin counties. And that border is largely where the Blue Ridge Parkway goes today. And I was just like, I don't understand this at all. What is this? And so the more I started looking at it, the more I realized that something amazing had happened, and that is amazing to me anyway. And that is that that the Appalachian Trail in its earliest days, when it was being created, took an entirely different route from Roanoke to Damascus, and from the one that it takes today. And then so that was in 1930, and then in 1952, the ATC and the Roanoke Club, which was heavily involved in all this, moved the trail to its present location, 50 miles to the west. And I mean, that's a huge difference. The Appalachian Trail moves around all the time. It gets a little longer every year. Some years it gets a little shorter, but mostly just gets a little longer.
A couple miles is not 50 miles. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Or even, and normally it moves like a couple of 100 yards or, over to the other side of the ridge. And 50 miles was just crazy. And so I had to know more and more. And at some point it occurred to me, okay, I've learned what I can learn in the archives between the Roanoke Club, the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club, and the ATC. I've kind of learned what I can learn. I need to go. And so I just got in my car, and, it took like 3 days.
And how long ago was this when you started this? Was this relatively 3 or 4?
2018, I think.
Okay.
I think it was the summer of 2018 that I just drove down there, and then while just before I left, I got an email from a guy in Floyd, and which if you haven't been to Floyd, Virginia, you have to go. I'm wearing my like Floyd, Virginia hat,
You are
and
representing all the
I'm
way
totally
around.
representing. Well, I'm on the board of a wonderful nonprofit in a little it's called the Handmade Music School there in Floyd. They teach old time music to kids, and it's really great. But so a guy who had retired to Floyd, he wrote me an email saying, um, because I had posted something in my blog about it, and he wrote me an email saying, hey, I read your blog post about this, and would you be interested in maybe giving a talk at the Floyd Public Library about the old Appalachian Trail? And I said, sure, why not? So, and I thought like 7 people would show up, and instead like 30 people showed up, and there was so much enthusiasm for this, and there were mostly people who wanted to tell me that the trail used to go across my grandfather's farm, or used to be right down the road from where my aunt and uncle lived, and so I realized that people were really connected to the trail, even though it wasn't there, and it
That
hadn't
is
been there,
wild.
since 1952. It'd
Yeah.
been 60 plus years at this, 65 years, and then you start seeing street signs like Appalachian Trail Way, and like in Galax, the Daughters of the American Revolution chapter is the Appalachian Trail chapter, and actually asked somebody from there, why is it the Appalachian Trail chapter? And she said, I don't know. And I said, well, the trail used to go right down Main Street in the middle of Galax. And she said, really? I had no idea. But so she was not so connected, but so many people were connected to this notion of the trail being central to their history. And so I just stopped what I was at that point. I stopped what I was working on, which was a kind of bigger history of the trail, and focused on this small story because it struck me that it was such an important story.
Yeah, I was just thinking, when I was looking through the book, it's almost like the New River is, you know, kind of the split, and then the new 300 miles goes up and from Damascus up and over McAfee Knob, Tinker Cliffs, that area. And then the old trail goes under. Am I getting that right?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, because the New River is it's so funny that it's the New River because it's one of the oldest rivers in North America, but it's, it actually runs north. And so it kind of bisects this geography and a little bit. And, today, if you're on the trail, you cross the New River in Pearisburg on the Highway 460 bridge, and it's not especially scenic, and
Right, right.
and it's just not one of the beauty spots on the trail, and that bridge, and but that's like close to 50 miles away from the little town of Fries, Virginia, which is the trail used to cross just north of Fries, but on a ferry. So
Okay, you got to tell
like
us about that.
so this is actually, there's so many stories about this section of the trail. I could go on, for 2 hours instead of an hour, but so my favorite of all is the so
And
the
by the way, this is something that we're missing. Like this, I'm assuming they had to use
yeah,
a ferry to get across the New River, is what I'm assuming. But this
yeah.
is something that we'll never see in current AT right now.
Well, Kennebec River, you have to get
Yeah,
on a canoe,
yeah,
right? But so that's really the only place where somebody takes you across. And but from 1930 to 1952, the way you got across the New River was on a flat bottom ferry boat, just big enough for like 4 people, and it was called Dixon's Ferry. The Dixon family received a land grant along the New River right after the Revolutionary War, and the the first federal government handed out all these land grants to Revolutionary War veterans, and irrespective of the fact that Cherokee actually lived there, they just had to move, and
right.
when the settlers showed up. But so the Dixons were given this grant of land along the New River, just north of eventually the eventual town of Fries, and so from the, I guess, early 1800s until around 1954, something like that, they ran a ferry across the river there, and the and by the time they had two, they had a larger ferry that they could actually put a wagon on or even a car eventually. But then there was a huge flood in 1940 that wiped out a lot of stuff in the New River Valley, and that big ferry washed away. But they still had the small sort of passenger ferry, and so if you were hiking south on the trail, you came to the Dixons lived on the east shore of the river, and so you would just go and knock on their door, and for a nickel, either Mr. and Mrs. Dixon would put you across the river, and if you were coming north, you had to stand on the other side of the river and shout until
That is crazy.
somebody heard you, and the New River is a really wide river. I mean, it's got to be 50 yards wide there. And so you just had to shout until somebody at the Dixon's house heard you. And there weren't a lot of hikers in those days. And so it's
Yeah.
not like they were hanging out on the front porch
Yeah,
waiting for
hanging
hikers
out
to
waiting.
show
Is
up.
there anybody
Right.
coming?
Right.
Like, our
And
hours of ferry are from 9 to 2, or,
right.
it's like,
So in 2019, I interviewed Gene Espy, who was the second through hiker, and Gene was, I guess, 90 or 91 when I interviewed him down in Georgia, and I asked him about that. I said, "So Gene, like, how long did you have to stand on the shore of the river shouting until somebody heard you?" And he thought about it for a minute. And he said, "I don't know, but it was a really long time." so, and so in doing my research, one of the families that I encountered was the Dixon family. And so one of the people I interviewed was Sally Dixon Rakes. And Sally's father and mother were the last people to run the ferry.
wow.
And so she remembers the hikers from when she was a little girl. And, she's in her late 70s now, I guess. And so when I was talking to Gene, I said, "So what else do you remember about getting across the river?" And he said, "Oh, well, it was really nice. Mrs. Dixon came and got me, and she pulled me across. And then I sat on her front porch, and we had some, I think it was like lemonade or iced tea or something, and
Yeah.
chatted for a little bit. And then I went on my hike." And then he said, "But I remember there was this little girl hiding behind the screen in the screen door. And he said, I tried to get her to come out and talk to me because she seemed so cute. And, if you ever met Gene Espy, he's the sweetest man on the planet. And he just wanted to talk to this little girl." That was Sally.
That
And,
that is
and I,
crazy.
yeah, right. And I said, "Sally, do you remember Gene Espy?" And she said, "Oh, sure. I remember him. He was such a nice man. He sent us a postcard after he made it to Maine." And, and I said, "Well, he remembers you, and he tried to get you to come outside and talk to him, but you wouldn't. Why wouldn't you?" And she said, "Well, he had a beard." And and I said, "Like, why?"
That was
Like,
scary.
yeah, and I said, "Why is that a problem?" And she said, "Well, it was in the old days, and my father always told me that men with beards were either hobos or communists. And so, and so I should stay away from them." So she was just following orders. But the Dixons have become such good friends. I mean, Sally's
Wow.
daughter Paula is a really good friend. I've been to their family reunion, along the river, and you just get pulled into these families. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel so fortunate to have chosen to
Wow.
jump into that rabbit hole, because now I have friends like Sally and Paula, and a whole bunch of other people I talk about in the book.
Well, I'm glad you jumped into the rabbit hole. And we've got some questions in the chat, and you guys, I will get to those here shortly. But one of the things I want you to do, because I just always want to know what I'm missing, walk us along the terrain. Like, there's got to be beautiful outcroppings, beautiful mountaintops. Like, are there any highlights within that 300 miles? Because on
Oh
the
yeah.
other side, you got Damascus, of course, Tinker Cliffs, McAfee Knob, that whole area. What are we missing in that other 300 miles? Some
So
highlights.
So imagine that you've got the map of Southern Virginia spread out on the table in front of you. And in the bottom left corner is Damascus along the Tennessee border. And in the upper right corner is Roanoke. And McAfee Knob, is right outside of Roanoke. And so right now, the trail kind of comes out of Damascus, going from your left toward the center of the map. And then it turns north up to Parisburg. And then it cuts over to Dragon's Tooth and McAfee Knob and Tinker Cliffs, and then continues on up toward Shenandoah. That's the current route. The old route came out of Damascus but instead of going through the Grayson Highlands with the ponies and everything, it cut immediately north onto Iron Mountain, which is the ridge north of the Grayson Highlands. And so as you hiked along the old trail, which by the way, the Iron Mountain Trail today is the old Appalachian Trail west of the river. And so when you went along that river or that ridge line, there were a series of fire towers that you could climb up into. That they were still active fire towers, and look back out over the Grayson Highlands down into Tennessee. You could even, on a clear day, you could see all the way to the Smokies, and I don't think you could actually see the Smokies, but you could see down that way, and but you could see like the Holston River Valley and all that. And there were places like at Skulls Gap, you had this spectacular view of the Grayson Highlands just to your south. And then when you got to the New River, the last mountain on the New River was Farmer Mountain. And from the top of Farmer Mountain, you had a 360-degree view. And so you could see the Grayson Highlands to the southwest. To the southeast, you could see Pilot Mountain in North Carolina.
Wow.
And Buffalo Mountain up on the Blue Ridge Plateau. And to the north, you could see the peaks of Otter. I mean, it was just really an amazing view. And you saw the whole New River Valley laid out below you. Then you crossed on Dixon's Ferry. You went right through downtown Galax, which at the time was a furniture manufacturing town, and the home of the oldest and longest running fiddlers convention in the world, the Old Fiddlers Convention in Galax.
Mills, only you know that.
And, well, it's a great story,
awesome.
and if you like old time music, mountain music, bluegrass, the Fiddlers Convention in Galax is like that's where it's at.
When is that? Because I love that kind of
It's
music.
first second week of August.
It's coming.
Dates,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's amazing, just amazing, and so especially the kids when you go see the teenagers playing. Oh my God, they're so talented. But so it went right through Galax, crossed back into North Carolina for about 2 miles on a mountain called Fisher's Peak, and then it came up onto the Great Escarpment of Southwest Virginia. And followed the route that today the Blue Ridge Parkway takes.
Wow.
Because that was a colonial era road called the Ridge Road. And so when they were trying to figure out where the trail should go, well, there's an old abandoned roadbed. Let's just use that. And which was pretty standard as they were building out the AT in the 30s. And then the National Park Service, when they decided to put in the Blue Ridge Parkway, said, "Oh, look, a roadbed. We'll use that." And so the AT had to move. But along that route, went along the edge of the escarpment for a little bit, and then it dived down into the Dan River Gorge, the headwaters of the Dan River, and it went over something called the Pinnacles of Dan, which was a sort of pyramid-shaped mountain right in the middle of a gorge. And there was a pretty easy trail going, if you're going north, there was a pretty easy trail going up to the summit of the pinnacle. But then there was virtually no trail going down the other side.
Wow.
I mean, there were trail markers, but and I asked Gene Espy about it. I said, how was it hiking, down that? And he said, I pretty much fell the whole way and just kind of rolled. And then you climbed up something called the Indian Ladder, which Cherokee had like carved into the granite wall of the gorge, and then you were back up on the what's then became the Ridge Road, and eventually you ended up on Tinker Mountain, Catawba Mountain, where
that's where it came back.
Yeah, so if you've been to McAfee Knob, there's everybody drives up. It's like Route 309 or something, highway
311.
Yeah. 311, yeah, 311, and there's a parking area there. Well, the trail came up Route 311. And then got onto the mountain and went up to McAfee Knob. So
interesting.
And then it resumed the route that we know today.
Yeah. So we have several questions, and I am going to get to those. I guess my last question before we get to the chat questions is, do we have a clear answer why the trail was moved?
Yeah, we do. It's a 2-part answer, really. The first part is, the Appalachian Trail is a volunteer-run organization, a volunteer-run park, mm-hmm. and there are 30 clubs today. There have been as many as 33 clubs, plus the ATC, that are responsible for this trail that we all love. And so 98% of the work on the trail today is done by volunteers, and that part of Virginia was and is incredibly rural, and like Galax is the only city, and it has a population of, I don't know, 3,000 people, and so it was really hard to form trail clubs in such a rural area,
Mm.
trail clubs that would stick. And it was also during the Great Depression and then the Second World War. And so, if you look at where the other trail clubs are, they're based in Roanoke, Lynchburg, you know, Northern Virginia, D.C., cities, and with real population to draw on, who you can, get a group of volunteers. Asheville, that you can get a group of people to go out on the trail on a regular basis. So they had a really hard time finding volunteers who could be consistently counted on to take care of the trail. And so the Roanoke Club and even volunteers from DC, from the Potomac Club, would come down on a regular basis to do whatever maintenance they could do. And so that was the first problem. And then the second was that, so that was a problem. And then there was an opportunity. And the opportunity was that the Jefferson National Forest expanded dramatically in the late 1930s, early 1940s. And so it created the possibility of moving the trail into federal land substantially. And so that would mean that the Forest Service would, keep an eye on it and even help out a little bit with trail maintenance, not a lot, but some. And
Yeah.
and so it was both a problem of not enough volunteers and an opportunity of moving to federal land. And so and the president of the Roanoke Club at the time, Jim Denton. Lots of people have stayed at the Jim and Molly Denton shelter in Northern Virginia. That's the
Okay.
same Jim Denton. The Dentons moved to the Northern Virginia at some point, and were longtime PATC members, as well as having been with the RATC. But he really was a strong advocate for moving the trail into the Jefferson National Forest, and they actually had planned to do it in the early 1940s, and then we got involved in the Second World War, and so it got put off until after the war.
So, what is your personal conclusion after meeting the characters in the book and learning about the community and the history, behind not only, where you're from, but these lost or ghost 300 miles of the trail? What's your personal takeaway?
I think so much about the communities and the people, because and this is one of the real themes in the book, is about loss, and both about what the communities lost, because they lost out on not only the economic opportunity that the trail has provided for all these little rural communities along the trail, um, but they also lost out on the cultural exchange, and because now hikers on the AT come from everywhere, literally. And I met somebody from Australia just the other day, and 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 so these small, and they're not isolated communities at all, but they're just quieter communities, might be a better way to put it, in rural areas. The people in those communities get to meet hikers who come from everywhere, and the hikers get to meet people who live in communities, quiet communities, that they're not familiar with. And so the
Yeah.
cultural exchange that happens when hikers go into a grocery store or into a diner or into a hostel or whatever, that that never happened for these folks, or it only happened in a very small way for 22 years, and so they really lost out on that, and then hikers really missed out on some spectacular geography, and they missed out on getting to meet all of these great folks. They don't get to go to the Fiddlers Convention. Floyd Fest is a huge music fest in Floyd County, and while it wouldn't Sobos would be able to take advantage of Floyd Fest because it happens in late August, I guess. Not this year; they couldn't work it out this year, but the Floyd Fest is just an amazing thing, and all the hikers like Earl Schaefer and Gene Espy and others who went over the pinnacles of Dan all said it was the second hardest part of the entire trail after Mahoosic Notch.
Oh, wow. That's
So
huge considering everything in the whites and everything
right,
in Maine.
right, right. So, so but I also
See, that
like
makes me want to hike the Pinnacles of Dan. Is that possible?
it is possible. It's in land that is controlled by a power company, and so you just have to go onto their website and apply for a permit, which they automatically grant, and
Interesting.
but the reason is it's gated. Entry into that area is gated, and so you just have to get the code for the gate, and don't do it by yourself
Yeah.
because it's
Especially
challenging.
uncharted territory.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
So I interrupted you there. You were saying that the hikers and, they would never have that sense of community, and then the community would never have the sense of the hiker.
right. And of course now if we move the trail back, then all the communities along the where the trail went, then they would miss out. And this is the thing that I think when the people who were planning the Appalachian Trail, it never occurred to them, or if they did, they didn't. If it did occur to them, they didn't write about it. That that this was one of the tremendous benefits of the trail was to bring people into contact with each other in ways that they would not have. And so like along this old section of the trail, um, the first woman to hike every step of the Appalachian Trail was Mary Kilpatrick, who was a chemistry professor from Philadelphia. She hiked with her husband Martin and George Outerbridge, who like the Outerbridge shelter in Pennsylvania is named for George Outerbridge. So they hiked through there in 1937 or 1938, or maybe even a little earlier. But so Mary finished the trail in 1939 as a section hiker. She should be your hero. And
She is. From now
so,
on, she's our hero.
yeah.
Yes.
So everybody thinks Grandma Gatewood, first woman to hike the Appalachian Trail. Let's all remember she was the third woman to hike the Appalachian Trail. That there was Mary Kilpatrick, who did it first as a section hiker. And then there was Mildred Norman, who hiked this old route.
Now, see, I
Who
thought Mildred was the first. She's
she
not.
was the first through hiker.
Through hiker. Okay.
It's on how you phrase it. Mary Kilpatrick was the first woman to walk every step of the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah. That's
So
right. And we
she
own
finished
it.
her
We'll
she
take her.
finished her yeah, she finished her section hike in the 1930s. Uh, but so she hiked, along this was the route that she took, and Mildred Norman took the same route. And as impressive as Grandma Gatewood was, Mildred Norman was seriously badass because in addition to through hiking, she and her boyfriend, they used to introduce themselves in a funny way. His name was Richard Lamb, and he would introduce, when they met people, he would say, "Hi, I'm Dick Lamb, and this is Millie," and just let people assume that they were married because it was
Well, you had
1952.
to. 1930.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was the 1950s, but still. But so they were also the first flip floppers because they hiked to like Harrisburg or someplace like that, and then they were worried that they weren't going to get to Katahdin in time, so they jumped forward to Katahdin. They hiked back. When they got to the long trail, where the long trail and the AT separate, they hiked up to Canada, and then came back to where the AT and the long trail connect, and then they continued on back to where they started their flip flop. And so they did the AT plus the top part of the long trail.
This is why I love having you on the show, because we get the facts.
Right. So
Mills delivers the facts. That's right. Mary, I'm gonna incorporate her into the podcast somehow. It makes me
I
want
have
to
I
do.
have pictures. So there are
There
not
you
many
go.
pictures in Mary. I have the only picture that I've ever seen of Mary Kilpatrick on trail.
I need it. Could I get?
Yeah,
You and I will
absolutely.
chat. Yes,
Yeah.
100%. So let's get into some questions. There's the same question that has been asked a couple times. This was actually on my list. So RVA Hiker Girl and a couple others put, is all 300 miles of the old AT still a trail or hikeable? Or I guess how much is hikeable? I know you said the Iron Mountain Trail.
So I would say almost all of it is hikeable. And the reason is because east of the New River, most of the trail was road walking, which was how the AT was when it was first created. Something like, I don't know, like 800 miles of the trail. They declared the trail done in 1937, and something like 800 miles of the trail was road walking in 1937. And then, slowly but surely they moved it off of roads. But and so and these roads are not paved roads. These are like gravel roads, dirt roads, and
And those are hard to walk on.
yeah, they are.
Yeah.
They get they're yeah. My ankles get tired of them.
Yeah.
But you can east of the New River. That's all very doable, and there's sections of it that are trail also. And there are anybody who really wants to do that. Let me know. I have the old trail guide scanned as a PDF, and I'll just send it to you. And
Interesting.
so and
That's
and those old trail guides, were incredibly detailed. Go 150 yards, turn right in an abandoned school, go 1.25 miles down, and then turn left at the Edwardsville store, that sort of thing.
I love that.
And so my favorite I remember near Montebello, north of this section we're talking about, the trail guide at one point said, skirt the softball field behind the snack bar,
You pick up a snack while you're going
get a hot
by.
dog. Yeah, get a hot dog as you go by. But so that part is it's easily done. You just have to navigate with the guide. And and there's actually a bike club a mountain biking club in Floyd County that has created the Tour de Floyd. There's a winery in the north part of the county and a winery in the south part of the county, and they ride the old route of the trail on all those roads, and to get from of course they finish at a winery because why not?
Yeah. And
And
I hope everybody is taking notes about this.
so
They're going to come back and listen to the podcast multiple times because there's a
right.
lot of information.
So and then when you cross over the New River today, there's no ferry anymore, but you can use the Dixon's Ferry Bridge, which is just upstream from where Dixon's Ferry was, like a quarter mile. And then
Sally will not be there, right?
She
won't
will
be
no.
there.
She does. She lives closer to Hillsville these days. But so you cross over the Dixon's Ferry Bridge, and then the New River Trail is there, and that's the old AT went along the railroad line, which is now the New River
New
Trail.
River Trail.
So you take the New River Trail until you get to Billsby Dam, and you're on the old AT. And then there is a trail up to the summit of Farmer Mountain. I'm not sure that it's a formal trail, but it's definitely findable and walkable. And then from there, you have to scramble a little bit to find where the Iron Mountain Trail just kind of stops and near
Interesting.
there. And then once you get on the Iron Mountain Trail, then you can hike it all the way to Damascus.
Yeah, because that's 150 miles, right?
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah. Yeah. You kind of answered this, but Sean Knights, who is out on the trail right now on a section hike, thanks for joining, Sean. He says, has anyone ever made a map that shows the major changes over the years?
Sean, that's such a great question. And we set out to do that at the Digital History Center that I direct. And we realized that there were too many changes, most of which were really small. And however, there's a reporter and a cartographer at the Washington Post who right now are working on exactly that. I've been helping them in the archives, and they're both incredibly talented. The reporter's name is Lizzie Johnson, and she's just such a great reporter and writer. And so they're really interested in this. And so what they're going to focus on is the major changes. So like the abandonment of the last 37 miles in Georgia when they eliminated Mount Oglethorpe as the southern terminus and moved it to Springer. This section that we've been talking about, the Carlisle Valley in Pennsylvania. There's a big change in Connecticut. And then some of the trail in Maine moved around a lot in the early days. Like the 100-mile wilderness was not part of the original trail.
Well, I know Monson, one of the original signs is there where you had to actually do a major road walk.
Right.
And it went right by Shaw's Hostel, and the original side there, it's funny. It's a cool sign. But yeah, that's interesting. And one of my goals that I want to do, I actually want to go to Mount Oglethorpe. I don't know, how far is it? Well, I assume you know this just because you're Bills. How far is it from right now Mount Oglethorpe to Springer?
Well, it's 37 miles of walking. And actually, the Georgia Club, we on the Green Tunnel podcast, we have an episode about Mount Oglethorpe, and the guy we interviewed, Clardy Schwartz from the Georgia Club, who lives near Oglethorpe, he's kind of responsible for that, and they've done a lot of improvement up at the summit. The Oglethorpe Monument got removed and taken down the mountain to the town of Jasper because people were shooting it.
Oh
Because
God.
that's what we do.
That's what we
And
do.
right, and so it's getting full of bullet holes. So they all chipped up. So they took it down to Jasper and fixed it. But the base is there, and they've got some interpretive signs now and everything. And there's some nice trails up there, which many of which were Cherokee trails, and they've done a really nice job with that. And then you can see where to go. I mean, I've talked to two people who've hiked it in the last, I don't know, 20 years, and it's mostly roads, but
It's
yeah, so you can
doable.
do it. It's doable.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we got another one. So I guess to conclude Sean's question, is there an ETA that, they might have this out, or just depends on
So,
how long it takes?
so what they've told me is end of the summer is what
Oh,
they're shooting for. They're not on a deadline on this,
gotcha.
so but yeah, the Washington Post cartography team just do some amazing maps. If you're a map geek, you can just lose yourself in the projects they do.
Yeah, I can be a map geek real quick when it comes to that kind of stuff. Like I've already got like a note to self, email Mills for the PDF of the old route. But the Bird Jay says, question for Mills. One day, driving down Skyline Drive, a hiker was on the phone and said he was hiking the old AT. Do you or anyone here know if that is correct?
So it's possible to hike sections of the original AT in Shenandoah National Park. Um, when you come in from the south, um, you actually enter the park right at this, down close to Waynesboro, and you're in the park briefly, and then for a little while you're on PATC land that feels like the park, but it's actually PATC
Oh, I didn't know that.
land conservancy. Yeah, it's really hard for Shenandoah to expand. The Park Service cannot, by statute, they cannot buy more land for Shenandoah National Park. When the park was created, that was just part of the deal to landowners who had political clout wanted to make sure the Park Service wasn't going to take their land, so they got that written into the law. But like a conservancy just donated like 2,000 acres to the park last month, and so the park can't buy it, but people can give it to them. So PATC has its own conservancy, and they buy land around the park and then operate it as though it were the park, and so the Calf Mountain Shelter is actually on PATC land, not in the park, and feels like you're in the park. I mean, you know,
Well
just it's just
maintained.
us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And PATC takes care of all the shelters in the park anyway. But as soon as you go north from Calf Mountain Shelter, you get at, I think it's Jarman Gap. You get to the intersection of the AT and the Mormon River Trail. Well, the Mormon River Trail is the old AT, and so for about, I don't know, 13, 14 miles along the Mormon River Trail, you're on the old AT. And then there are a couple other sections in the park that are different from the original route.
So in the park, I don't know what episode it was on your podcast in the Shenandoah National Park. You were talking about going up from a particular sign in the park, and you would go up a particular amount of yards, and there would be an old AT shelter there. Am I remembering that correct?
Oh, that's actually in the book. When if the only shelter along the lost section of the AT in Virginia is along the Blue Ridge Parkway, and I can't remember now if it's in Floyd County or Patrick County, but it's like right around the border between the two. And the overlook on the Blue Ridge Parkway is called the Saddle, and it's near Rock
Okay.
Castle. It's near Rock Castle Gorge, which the Rock Castle Gorge loop, you can park at the Saddle and do the Rock Castle Gorge loop. It's like, I don't know, 12 miles or something like that. It's a wonderful hike. Uh, but when you're at the Saddle like overlook and you're standing there looking out over the Piedmont in front of you, if you look to the right, there's a trail going off into the woods. Well, that's the old AT. And if you stay on that trail going south, I don't know, a quarter mile, third of a mile, it goes uphill, not a very steep uphill, and there's a shelter there, built by the CCC in the 1930s, and that's like Earl Schaefer spent the night there on his through hike, and that's the only shelter that was built along the original section of the trail.
And it's
And
still
that
there.
still well because the CCC, they loved
Oh
concrete,
yeah.
and so, but also that shelter would never be allowed today because it's a beautiful little shelter. There's a picture of it in the book, and it's a beautiful little shelter. But if you walk out the front of the shelter, it has a side door, it has a fireplace. But you go in the side door. But if you walk out the front door, the first step is fine, the second step is fine, and then the third step is about 800 feet straight down.
Okay, that's
So,
if you get up in the middle of the night, you might be
right.
in trouble, right?
So, like the National Park Service would never allow that today, and no trail club would allow that because somebody would die for sure, and maybe annually. And so, but it's a really
Yeah, don't tell
beautiful
anybody
shelter.
you heard about that here, okay?
Right,
We are
right,
not
right,
responsible.
right. I don't even remember what I just said.
Exactly.
But it's the views from there are really great, really spectacular.
Excellent. All right, so Belinda says, and I guess this is in general, are they still taking smaller section away from towns when they do reroutes, or are most reroutes at this day and age very small?
Most of them are pretty small. The trail jumped in length this year by like, I don't know, 2.5 miles or something like that, and which was a lot. And because it's pretty well fixed at this point, the reroutes that happen now are, there's still a few segments of road walking, not much, but there's still a few, or the trail just gets kind of close to busy intersections. And so if they can move it, they do. Or if there's a possibility of a better view, or a rock slide might force it to move a little bit, that sort of thing. I mean, the roller coaster in Northern Virginia is a result of one of those reroutes to get the trail off of a road walk, and so it's actually, the road walk was easier because it didn't have all the up and down, but it was super boring. It was just 15 miles on a paved road, and so we got the roller coaster, but. The ATC and the trail clubs generally are trying to move the trail out of towns, but not always. So like it's never going to move out of Hanover, New Hampshire, where
Yeah.
Dartmouth is. That's just not going to happen. It's not going to move out of Boiling Springs. That's just not going to happen.
I think there would be a major revolt if it moved out of Hot Springs.
Yeah, Hot Springs, right?
Yeah.
If you tried to move out of Hot Springs, there are about 12 different business owners who would come with pitchforks.
Yeah.
So plus,
same with Damascus. It's not going to move
right,
out of
it's not going to move out of Damascus, right? However, they moved it out of Monson a number of years ago now, but the hikers all still mostly go through Monson.
Yeah.
So
yeah, because there's a cutoff. You could actually hike the old AT, and if you call Shaw's Hostel, they'll tell you how to do it down to Shaw's.
Yeah.
I forget now. I mean, when I was in Maine, I could have told you, but it's very evident where to go when you're hiking in that area close to Monson. And that's a shame, because if the trail went through Monson, I think it would change that town.
Well, and again, we interviewed a whole bunch of people in Monson for an episode of the Green Tunnel, and and they feel a little sad about it, but at the same time, they say most of the thru hikers come through town anyway because first, I mean, if you think about it, you're about to then launch into the 100-mile wilderness,
or get out of it,
or so you're not going to resupply in Monson.
Yeah, you are.
Yes, you are. And so I always wonder, because there are a lot of thru hikers who are very sort of purist fanatics about you must walk every step of the White Blazes. But did they maybe skip and go into Monson? And if they did they then go back and, stay on the White Blazes?
Listen, I've heard people say that, I've done this, that, or the other. And literally I've seen them walking on the road to avoid, a certain section. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. That's right. You're not a thru hiker anymore.
No.
That's why it's great to be a section hiker.
That's right. You can hike the section, you can go back and hike the other section and carry on, right?
I've hiked some sections like 6 times.
I know.
So,
I can't even count how many times I've been through Georgia. It's like, okay. I think I've memorized every corner of Georgia because and North Carolina because it's easily accessible. You know,
Right.
like Virginia, the Shenandoahs specifically are
Right.
easily accessible for you. So, but that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it to stay connected to the trail and have that community connection and talk about that for a second because you do maintain a shelter.
I do. I am the maintainer of the Manassas Gap Shelter, which is one of the oldest shelters still on the trail. It was built by the CCC in the 1930s, although out of logs. So it's built out of old chestnut logs, and it's just a beautiful old standard kind of the Adirondack style shelter, the lean-to kind of style, and made out of logs. And we have a really nice copperhead who hangs out there and
No.
likes to frighten people. And but it's a shelter that like through hikers don't tend to stay at Manassas Gap because they mostly stay at Denton because it has a shower and a horseshoe
Yeah.
pit and a huge deck, and like I would stay
Yeah.
at Denton.
That's a great
And
shelter. I mean,
it's a
it
great
is a
shelter.
great shelter. Yeah.
It's a great shelter, and I mean, I would certainly stay there. And then Manassas Gap is only 5 or 6 miles north, and so if you're a through hiker, by then you're doing 25 miles a
Yeah.
day, 20 miles a day. So you go on to Rod Hollow, which is the last shelter before the roller coaster, or if you're feeling your oats, then you go all the way to Bear's Den, and so we don't get a lot of through hikers at Manassas Gap, but a lot of overnighters and short distance or lashers and a ton of day hikers. I mean, just an absolute ton of day hikers because it's the closest shelter to Northern Virginia's population of 3 million people, and so it's great. I mean, that was the whole point of the Appalachian Trail in the first place
Yeah.
was for day hikers, and that's what it was designed for. And the idea that people would hike the whole trail in 1 year, the creators of the trail thought that was just ridiculous.
Nuts. Yeah.
Yeah, nuts. They thought they called it a stunt. It's just a stunt.
Yeah.
So
Well, Earl Schaefer stunted it, what, 3 times?
yeah, well, the first time they didn't believe him, when he had to prove
And
it.
there's controversy about that too.
Oh yeah.
I guess there's
Well, and the controversy,
documentation. Yeah.
well, the controversy arises actually about the section of trail that I wrote about in the book, because as he came down off of Farmer Mountain to Billsby Dam, and he walked along, he was going north. He walked along what's today the New River Trail. He couldn't find the markers for the ferry, and so he ended up walking. It was dark and it was raining, and he walked all the way into the town of Fries, which was an old mill town, and somebody there gave him a ride to Galax.
Okay.
So he just skipped like 10 miles of trail or something like that. He got a ride. So that means he's not a through hiker
So
anymore.
back then, I mean, he had to do what he had to do, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
And there were other sections, I will say, Earl apparently on that first hike, there were times when he just, the trail was not in good shape in 1948
Yeah.
when he did it. It had not been maintained at all during the Second World War. So it was really overgrown in places. And there were times where he would just get up on the Blue Ridge Parkway and walk along the Blue Ridge Parkway because the trail was in such bad shape. So it is the case that Earl Schaefer walked from Mount Oglethorpe to Mount Katahdin.
Yeah.
It is not the case that he followed every white blaze. And so because it was almost impossible. But
Yeah.
so if you're a purist, well, he's not the first through hiker. But
Well, who is? Because even Grandma
then
Gatewood talks about, yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure Mary and Mildred, I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
although
And
we'll take Mary to every white blaze. That's what we'll say. And that's,
well,
yeah.
and also Gene Espy was pretty strict about it. So
Yeah.
he was one of those people who really felt like I need to like stay on the trail, and so for sure Gene hiked every step of it like the correct way.
Yeah.
But
And that's what I've
yeah,
been told that Gene is at, well, I mean, I hear people talk, blah, 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 Earl Schaefer,
it's
Gene
all how
Espy.
you
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
all how you define it.
Yeah.
If your definition of, and plus it's worth remembering, the ATC does not recognize through hikes. It recognizes 2,000 mile hikes.
Completions. Yeah.
2,000. Your certificate says a 2,000 mile
Yeah.
hiker.
That is
So
true.
it does
Everybody's
not,
certificate says the same.
right. So and they don't, of course, they, as we know, as section hikers, they don't care whether you did it in 1 year or 50 years.
Nope. Nope. Nope.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, again, I can always take in an hour. So Mills, believe it or not, it's been 55 minutes. I told you in our email an hour,
Yeah.
we would have no problem chatting for an hour. So tell us what's next. Can people find you at talks coming up?
Yeah. I'm going to be actually this Saturday. I'm going to be at the Round Hill AT Festival here in Northern Virginia, and so you can definitely stop by. I'm going to be at the table. I'm a volunteer with the AT Museum up in Pennsylvania, and so I'm going to be at the AT Museum table. Um, and then if you go to my website, which is millskelly.net, I've got a list of all the appearances I have coming up. I'm going to be at Blacksburg Books. I'm going to be at uh, the Chapters Bookstore in Galax. I'm going to be in August. I'm going to be at the Museum of the Shenandoah Valley in July. So I'm just kind of all over. And as I told you, it's sort of earlier, I called it the low rent book tour. And that just is because like
Get
I'm
the
paying.
book, people.
That's right. I'm paying for the book tour, not
That's
not
right.
my publisher, not my
That's
publisher.
that's
So
that's how our podcast goes too.
right.
So the low rent podcast tour. And speaking of, my listeners have heard me mention this before, and I want to make it happen. I want to have a podcastathon because there are
I'm in.
several of us on the East Coast that are podcasters, all the way up from, James in the Adirondacks, all the way down to Florida. There are, I would say, 10 plus. I can't think of everybody right now, but I think it would be awesome to get all of us together and kind of work out, just being together and hosting whatever this podcastathon looks like. So Mills, my question to you is, are you in on the
I'm
podcastathon? And
I'm
how does,
so in. I'm
yeah,
so in.
yeah. And, one of these days you're going to get an email from me and I'm going to say, okay, when can everybody Zoom? Because I want to host this and I want to have people on, and just have conversations about everybody podcasting in their little niche on the East Coast. I think it would be awesome.
Yeah, like what's the coolest story that's come out of your show over the last year or something like
Yeah.
that?
I mean, that would take 5 hours if we had 10 people. And just what it takes to put on a podcast. Because if you lined everybody up, everybody does their show a little bit different. And I think that would be interesting to kind of
Yeah.
collaborate, live online. So I'm going to go ahead and say this fall, be on the lookout. We'll get through the summer. And I know you're working on your third season of the Green Tunnel podcast, which can be found anywhere on every podcast app out there. Where's the best place for people to buy your book? Obviously, they should come see you in person, right?
Right. Well, if you come see me in person, you get the autographed copy, and but also like I have the cash discount in person. Just saying. But if you go to my website, millskelly.net, I have a bunch of different links that you can use. The one that I really encourage is I have a link to Blacksburg Books in Blacksburg, Virginia, and they're an independent bookstore, a woman-owned business, and through there's a platform, like a purchasing platform for bookstores like that, and so it takes you to their page on that platform, and they get a nice credit as an
Nice.
independent bookstore. So it really supports an independent business. Or if you want an autographed copy, you can. I've got a Square set up on there, and you can buy one that way, and I'll sign it however you want and mail it to you.
All right, everybody, there you go. millskelly.net. Did I get that right?
You did.
Excellent. The Green Tunnel podcast, Mills' book, The Virginia's Lost Appalachian Trail. And one more question. Are you working on another book?
I am.
I do. Are you going to tell it? Is it
So
I'm
I'll
sure
just,
it's
I'll,
history
I will,
related, right?
of course, it's history related. It's about, okay, so as we all know, the history of the Appalachian Trail is full of quirky hiker characters. None of them even approaches the quirkiness of the guy who I'm writing about.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He is like in this whole other league of quirkiness. And I'll just say this: he may have been the first person to hike from Mount Katahdin to Mount Oglethorpe over 8 years. So a section hiker. So you'll love him. But he was also, this was in the 1930s. He was 6'8" and Danish. So if you know, like Tom Gathman, the real hiking Viking, this guy was the original hiking Viking.
Okay.
So that's who
All
I'm
right.
working on. And
stay
like
tuned.
I said, a whole next level quirkiness.
Okay. Is there ETA?
No.
Okay.
There's not.
Okay.
There's not. But I was
it's
actually
better not to put an ETA on it yet.
No, but I was in Vermont this past week at the Archives of the Green Mountain Club, and finding more about him. He also hiked the Long Trail in 1931, and helped blaze the Long Trail in the 1920s. And so, really interesting guy.
Okay.
Just saying. Let's just say he had a life you couldn't possibly make up.
All right. We're in, and you're going to come back because we're going to have a podcast-a-thon sometime or another.
Oh, yeah.
And then when all that comes out, you definitely have to come back on again. So,
okay,
Mills, hang on. Don't go anywhere. I am going to switch the screen. I'm going to close this out, and I want to chat with you after the show. So, you guys, Mills is unbelievable. Thank you again, Mills, for coming back on. I'm telling you, an hour went by. It was not a problem. One more time, you guys, you got to get this book, Virginia's Lost Appalachian Trail, millskelly.net. And I'm just going to close it out, you guys. I really appreciate it. And until the next show, thanks for listening. Be safe out there, everybody, and happy section hiking.